The file was marked Geheime Kommandosache, top secret. Buried in a forgotten German archive for nearly 80 years, it told a story that sounded like fiction. Inside a remote prisoner-of-war camp, hundreds of miles from the front, Allied airmen, unarmed, starving, and watched day and night, had done the impossible. They built an airplane, not a model, a real working aircraft assembled in secret beneath the eyes of the German guards. And one cold night in 1944, they flew it to freedom. For decades, this story remained buried under dust and disbelief. Even historians dismissed it as a camp rumor. But when fragments of the original Luftwaffe report surfaced in the 1990s, the truth began to emerge. This was not myth. It was one of the most audacious engineering acts of World War II. The camp was Stalag Luft III, located near Sagan in Lower Silesia, modern-day Żagań, Poland. It was built to hold Allied airmen, men captured after their planes were shot down over occupied Europe. Behind its double fences of barbed wire guarded by machine gun towers, nearly 10,000 prisoners lived in cramped wooden barracks. Most had been pilots or navigators once. Now they were numbers in the German war machine. But the human instinct for freedom, for ingenuity, does not die easily. Every prisoner who arrived at Stalag Luft III faced the same search, the same humiliation. Boots, uniforms, and pockets emptied. Radios confiscated, maps torn apart, even pencil leads counted. Yet the Luftwaffe underestimated the resourcefulness of the men they held. What they saw as helpless captives were, in truth, trained engineers, mechanics, and tacticians, the very kind of minds who had built the air forces now fighting them. Among them was Flight Lieutenant Jack Woolley, a British Royal Air Force pilot downed over France in 1942. Another was Lieutenant Clarence Cliff Carroll, an American B-17 co-pilot from the 8th Air Force. Both had been transferred to Stalag Luft III after repeated escape attempts. They were not alone. Many of the men who would later take part in the Great Escape were in the same compound. But as tunnels were discovered and security tightened, the prisoners began searching for new ways to outwit their captors. The first idea came as a joke. In late 1943, during the bitter Silesian winter, one of the British officers, a former aeronautical engineer named Tony Rolt, sketched a small glider on a scrap of toilet paper. The men laughed at first until Rolt explained, "We've tunneled under their noses, why not fly over them?" The camp's north compound was a maze of underground activity. Escape tunnels, forges, hidden workshops, all built in defiance of German search teams. But Rolt's idea required more than tunneling. It required space, material, and needed a launch ramp, and the only way to build it was by using the roof of the barrack itself. Using stolen pulleys and wires, the men designed a system of elastic launch cords made from bed sheets and rubber, enough to catapult the glider off the roof, across the fence, and into the dark forest beyond. If the plan succeeded, 2 men could reach Allied lines in less than an hour. Every day brought new risks. Search squads raided huts. Dogs sniffed through walls and guards routinely smashed furniture looking for tunnels. Yet the glider project remained undiscovered. Its builders had disguised every piece as harmless. A shelf plank here, a laundry pole there. Even the tools were hidden inside hollow table legs. At night, by candlelight, Rolt and Woolley studied stolen blueprints of Luftwaffe aircraft, memorizing wing loading and lift ratios. They used mathematical formulas scratched into the backs of playing cards. The glider's wings were covered with sleeping bag covers stitched together, coated in paste to tighten the fabric. It was primitive, but aerodynamic. In March 1944, news swept through the camp. The Great Escape had begun. 76 men had crawled through the tunnel known as Harry. Within days, almost all were recaptured and 50 were executed on Hitler's orders. The shock crushed morale. The Luftwaffe doubled security and dismantled much of the camp's infrastructure. But amid the despair, the glider team continued in silence. They knew discovery now meant certain death. By mid-1944, the Allied advance was reaching Poland's borders. The prisoners could hear distant gunfire at night. Yet even as liberation seemed near, the urge to finish their impossible machine drove them on. It was no longer just an escape attempt. It was a statement of defiance, proof that even in captivity, imagination could not be caged. The plane's design was astonishingly sound. It was a two-man glider with a wingspan of 32 feet and a body length of 19 feet. Empty weight, 240 pounds. Projected glide range nearly 2 miles from a rooftop launch at 60 feet elevation. They called it Operation Soaring Eagle. The plan was for Woolley and Carroll to take the controls on the first flight, steering toward a dense forest west of the Oder River. The final assembly took place in the summer of 1944. Using smuggled grease from the camp's kitchen, they lubricated the bearings. Every joint was hand-sanded smooth with fragments of stolen emery paper. They even constructed a small rudimentary altimeter from watch parts and a piece of glass salvaged from a broken lantern. From the barracks attic, they could hear German voices below, unaware that above them rested a machine built to defy them. Inside the camp, word of the bird spread cautiously among trusted men. It became a symbol, something to believe in amid the hunger and disease. Pilots who had lost friends at sea came to the attic to run their hands along the wooden frame, whispering encouragements as if blessing a comrade before takeoff. By autumn, rumors began to circulate among the guards that something strange was happening in Hut 103. An SS inspection team arrived, led by a Gestapo officer from Breslau. The prisoners were lined up, searched and questioned. The attic was checked, only briefly. The glider was invisible behind its false wall. After they left, the men exhaled in silence. They had come within inches of death. In November 1944, the camp's commandant announced that all prisoners would soon be evacuated westward ahead of the advancing Soviet army. That meant the glider would either be finished and flown, or destroyed. The builders had no choice. They accelerated their work. Woolley tested the pulley system using a weighted sack, and it performed better than expected. The launch cords, braided from rubber stolen from gas mask straps, produced enough force to propel the craft across the fence line. If the weather held and the guards were distracted, they would attempt the flight on a moonless night. Then came disaster. An Allied bombing raid struck a railway near Sagan. Debris fell across the region and German authorities sealed the camp for days. During that time, one of the guards stumbled upon sawdust near Hut 103's drainpipe, evidence of unauthorized work. A search was imminent. Desperate, the prisoners sealed the glider behind a wall of planks and camouflage netting. They even staged a fake theatrical stage to explain the carpentry noise. The ruse worked. The search passed without discovery. By late December, snow blanketed the camp. The wooden roof sagged under ice, the fences gleamed under frost, and inside the attic the glider slept. Ready, but untested. The men began preparing for launch. They studied wind direction, calculated elevation angles, and rehearsed every step in whispers. The plan called for the entire hut to cooperate. One group would distract the guards with a staged fight, while another operated the winch system from below. Woolley and Carroll would climb through the attic window, strap in, and trust their creation to carry them beyond the wire. Outside, the war was collapsing. The Allies had landed in Normandy 6 months earlier, and Soviet forces were closing in from the east. Yet within the cold wooden walls of Stalag Luft III, time seemed frozen. Each man's world had shrunk to one fragile machine, the wooden aircraft that could make history. no one slept the night before the attempt. Woolley polished the crude metal levers. Carroll checked the wing struts once more. They shook hands in the dim light, understanding the risk. The camp clock struck midnight, and then silence. Midnight, December 1944. Snow drifted over the barbed wire like ash. The guards in the towers stamped their boots against the cold, rifles hanging loose in their hands. From the outside, Stalag Luft III slept under a quiet sky. Inside, beneath the barrack roof of Hut 103, two men crouched beside the most improbable machine of the Second World War. Jack Woolley checked the control lines one last time. Clarence Carroll looked through the small cutout that served as their cockpit window, a square of glass stolen from a lantern. Beneath them, prisoners whispered in the dark, ready to trigger the release mechanism. The glider was poised on a wooden ramp, angled toward the perimeter fence. The moment the cords released, the plane would launch like a bullet. "Ready," Woolley whispered. A signal passed below, 2 knocks on the beam. Then came the sound of sliding wood, a sudden jolt, and the impossible happened. The glider shot forward, the cords snapped. For an instant, gravity held it back. Then the air caught under its wings. The prison disappeared beneath them. The wooden aircraft rose, clumsy, trembling, but airborne. Outside, a sentry shouted. A spotlight swung through the snow, too late to catch the shape already soaring beyond the outer fence. In that moment, 2 prisoners had defied the German Reich not with weapons, but with wood, fabric, and willpower. The glider leveled out at 30 feet, then dipped toward the forest beyond Sagan. The men could see faint fires in the distance, villages under blackout orders. The wind howled through gaps in the fuselage. The controls worked. The dream was real. For 10 glorious minutes they flew free. No engines, no guns, no sound but the rush of cold air. It was the only manned flight ever launched from inside a POW camp during the Second World War. Then came the forest. The glider struck the treetops, shearing off one wing. The body flipped, tearing through branches before crashing into deep snow. Silence returned. For hours, nothing moved. At dawn, German soldiers discovered wreckage half buried under the trees. 2 sets of footprints led away from the crash site, then vanished near a frozen stream. The search that followed lasted days. The official report stamped by Luftwaffe command concluded that 2 English prisoners perished in the attempt. The matter was quietly closed, but the report was wrong. Weeks later, as the Red Army advanced across Silesia, Soviet troops stumbled upon 2 exhausted men in RAF uniforms near the Oder River. They carried no identification, no weapons, only a folded piece of canvas and a crudely drawn map. The men were evacuated to Moscow and later to England under assumed names. Their story was deemed improbable and unverifiable. They said nothing. When Stalag Luft III was liberated in early 1945, Allied investigators found the remains of the wooden glider still hidden in the attic of Hut 103. German officers had tried to destroy it, but pieces survived. Fragments of wing ribs, wooden spars, and the pulley system. For years, no one knew what to make of them. The Kolditz glider, built later under similar conditions, became famous. The Stalag Luft III craft was forgotten. Only after the fall of the Berlin Wall did the truth re-emerge. In 1992, Polish researchers cataloging wartime ruins near Żagań uncovered Luftwaffe maintenance files referencing aerial contraption constructed by prisoners, December 1944. The attached sketches matched the prisoners' design almost perfectly. The impossible story was real after all. The construction of that glider represented more than an escape plan. It was a microcosm of the war itself, human intellect pitted against tyranny, creativity against fear. Inside those fences, men stripped of identity had rebuilt it piece by piece through invention. Archival documents reveal how they acquired every material. The wood came from bunk bed slats, the fabric from underclothes and sleeping bags. Nails were stolen from fence repairs, melted down to form bolts. Even the glue, a mixture of powdered milk and crushed porridge, was a triumph of chemistry under starvation conditions. The prisoners joked that it smelled like breakfast, but it held the wings firm at 40 miles per hour. The project's secrecy bordered on espionage. Notes were written in invisible ink made from urine. Blueprints were disguised as chessboards. Guards who grew suspicious were bribed with hand-carved toys and mock souvenirs. The ingenuity mirrored Allied code work happening thousands of miles away. Bletchley Park in England, Station Hydra in Canada. Different battlefields, same war of minds. Psychologically, the project saved lives. Testimonies later collected from survivors describe how morale had collapsed after the Great Escape massacre. Hope had become dangerous. But when rumors spread that someone was building an airplane upstairs, men began to smile again. They volunteered to help. One donated cloth, another tools, another risked punishment to fetch paint from a German workshop. It wasn't just a glider. It was collective defiance. In the final months of the war, that defiance echoed across Europe. POWs sabotaged factories, forged documents, passed intelligence through Red Cross parcels. Some built radios from scrap. Others simply refused to surrender their humanity. The glider of Stalag Luft III was the purest symbol of that resistance, an act of imagination in the darkest of places. After liberation, many of the camp's records vanished into Allied intelligence archives. Some were seized by the Soviets, others classified by MI9, the British escape and evasion branch. The reasoning was pragmatic. Techniques used by POWs could be valuable in future conflicts. But in 2001, a declassification under the British Public Records Act revealed a fragmentary file labeled AIR 52426, Special Engineering Project Sagan Compound. Inside was a technical sketch of a twin-seat glider Type C. Next to it, a faint signature, J. Woolley, FLT. By then, both Woolley and Carroll were gone. Woolley had died in 1988, never speaking publicly of his time in captivity. Carroll passed away in a veterans hospital in Texas 2 years later. Neither sought recognition. Perhaps they believed no one would believe them. Perhaps it didn't matter. But others remembered. Former inmates of Stalag Luft III, British, Canadian, Australian, and American airmen, testified that the flying machine was real. Some had carried pieces of it in their belongings when the camp was evacuated during the brutal winter march westward. One fragment of a wing rib ended up in the Imperial War Museum, mislabeled for decades as wood from prisoner barracks. Today, that fragment is all that physically remains of the glider that flew. The psychological dimension of the story fascinated post-war analysts. How could men under such confinement conceive and execute an engineering feat under constant surveillance? The answer lies in the unique composition of the prisoners. Stalag Luft III housed airmen, technically trained, disciplined, and accustomed to risk. Their survival depended on the same traits that had made them pilots: problem-solving under pressure, teamwork, and courage against impossible odds. In a sense, the camp became a laboratory of the human spirit. Every act of defiance, a carved key, a hidden radio, a false pass, was a small experiment in freedom. The glider was simply the grandest of them all. When viewed from the sky today, the outline of the old camp remains faintly visible. Fences long gone, guard towers collapsed into the soil. Only the foundations of the huts still mark where thousands once dreamed of open skies. Locals say that on quiet winter nights, when the wind blows through the trees, it makes a sound like wings cutting the air. The German documents discovered in the 1990s revealed another detail long forgotten. The camp commandant, Oberst Friedrich Wilhelm von Lindeiner, reportedly knew of the prisoner's glider but chose not to expose it. According to one post-war deposition, he told an Allied interrogator, they had earned their freedom if they could reach it. Whether that is true or myth will never be known, but it fits the man's reputation. An old-school officer who despised Nazi cruelty and treated his captives with reluctant respect. If von Lindiner truly turned a blind eye, then even the enemy contributed in some quiet way to that flight. When the war ended, Europe was a wasteland of twisted metal and grief. Cities lay in ruins, families scattered, millions displaced. Yet amid the ashes, stories like that of the Stalag Luftwaffe glider reminded humanity what had survived. Imagination, dignity, and the refusal to bow. In 2011, Polish and British historians reconstructed the aircraft using the surviving drawings and eyewitness accounts. The replica stood for years in the Żagań Museum, built from bed slats and fabric, exactly as the prisoners had done. Visitors often asked if it could fly. The curator would smile and say, "It already did." World War II was a conflict of machines, tanks, bombers, rockets, and submarines, but its outcome depended on something deeper, the human mind. Innovation under pressure, courage under captivity, and the relentless pursuit of freedom even when freedom seemed impossible. The story of the forgotten prison camp glider is not about victory or defeat. It's about identity. About men who refused to become numbers, who built wings out of scraps to remind themselves who they were. History books call it an escape attempt. But for those who lived it, it was resurrection. In the dim light of the museum today, the wooden frame of the replica glider gleams softly. Its crude joints and uneven surfaces speak louder than any polished aircraft. It carries no weapons, no engines, only memory. And in that silence, it tells the truth about the Second World War better than any archive ever could. Because somewhere in the cold night of December 1944, two shadows lifted from the roof of a prison camp and vanished into the snow. For 10 minutes they were free, and in those 10 minutes humanity proved that even behind barbed wire the skies still belonged to those who dared to dream.